4 days. Emotions have been running high in the Whittaker household. Family members say they no longer feel safe, their trust broken by repeated incidents that left them anxious and on edge. From late-night calls for money to threats that shook the very foundation of their home. The situation spiraled until one decision had to be made. B.J. Whittaker could no longer stay. With an eviction notice now served and security guards standing watch, the family is determined to reclaim their peace no matter how painful the process may be. The story begins quietly, in a house tucked away in odd West Virginia, where family ties and personal struggles have long been intertwined. For the Whittakers, home was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to heal from years of hardship. But in recent weeks, that fragile sense of safety has been shattered. Behind closed doors, tension mounted, arguments escalated, fear began to creep into daily life. At the center of the storm was B.J. Whittaker. To outsiders, her presence may have seemed like just another family member trying to get by. But to those inside the house, her behavior carried a weight they could no longer bear. Relatives recall a string of troubling incidents, phone calls demanding money, anger when help was refused, and a growing sense of intimidation that spread through the household like wildfire. One request in particular stood out, a call asking for $300. It wasn't simply the ask, but the reaction that followed. When the money wasn't given, the response was swift. A phone slammed down, silence in its place. Too many, that might seem small, but to the Whittakers it was a signal, a sign that trust had collapsed, that the line between family and manipulation had been crossed. Soon after, things escalated further. The family's only landline, a lifeline in a home where cell service barely exists, was allegedly locked away inside B.J.'s camper, out of reach of those who needed it most. For a family where elders struggled with serious heart conditions, the loss of that phone was more than an inconvenience. It was dangerous. Lorraine, 78 years old, has already suffered heart attacks. Betty has faced her own medical crises. Without that phone, if an emergency struck, they would be trapped. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just about disagreements or family drama. It was about safety, survival, and the very real risks of letting the situation continue. Whispers began circulating within the family. Stories emerged of B.J.'s alleged threats, words that cut deep, leaving loved ones fearful of what might happen next. Larry, caught between his daughter and the rest of the family, felt the strain most of all. He loved his daughter, but he couldn't deny the fear creeping into his own life. Grandchildren spoke quietly about accusations, about threats that if demands weren't met, terrible claims could be made. Too many, it felt like a trap, one where silence was safer than speaking. But silence was also the very thing destroying the family from the inside. It wasn't long before the pressure broke. Conversations began late at night, hushed and urgent. Should they let it slide again? Should they try to wait it out? Or was it time to make the hardest choice of all, to remove B.J. from the home, for good? Each option came with its own pain, but the answer became clear the more they weighed it. Safety had to come first. Protecting Lorraine, Betty, and the others was no longer optional. It was necessary, and so, the decision was made. Patrick, a steady presence in the family, began working tirelessly to make it official. Legal steps were taken. The wheels of an eviction notice began to turn. Quietly, in the background, preparations were made to ensure the process was not only carried out, but enforced. Security was arranged. No chances would be taken when the morning finally arrived. The paperwork was ready. B.J. Whittaker had been officially served with an eviction notice. It was the culmination of days of hidden stress, whispered fears, and sleepless nights. What had once been an unthinkable step was now the only way forward. But the story doesn't end with the notice. If anything, it begins there, because while the legal side provided clarity, the emotional weight was just beginning to sink in. Evicting family is never easy. To some it feels like betrayal. To others it feels like survival. For the Whittakers, it was both. Patrick, worn down but resolute, admitted he couldn't handle the burden alone. His own struggles living in a half-finished home, fighting against his own physical limitations, made the situation harder. Yet he pressed on, knowing the family needed him. At the same time, another voice stepped in. Determined, committed, willing to drive 10 hours just to make sure the family wasn't left vulnerable. The message was clear. This fight wasn't just about paperwork. It was about standing together, no matter the miles, no matter the cost. Now, with a guard stationed at the Whittaker property around the clock, the family breathes a little easier. The shadows of fear haven't completely lifted, but there is hope. To hope that they can reclaim their home. Who hope that peace can return. I hope that by drawing this line they have given themselves a chance to heal. For the community watching from the outside, the story is raw, complicated, and emotional. It's not just about eviction papers. It's about a family torn between love and survival, between loyalty and safety. And as they take these difficult steps, one truth remains. No one should feel unsafe in their own home. This is just the beginning of the Whittaker family's next chapter. A chapter defined not by fear, but by courage. A chapter where painful choices lead to protection, and where the future, though uncertain, carries the promise of peace. The Whittakers have spoken. B.J. must go. The eviction is real. And now, all eyes are on what happens next. So what do you think? Did the family make the right choice by serving this eviction notice? Or was there another path they could have taken? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation. When news broke that B.J. Whittaker had been served an eviction notice, reactions were mixed. Some saw it as an overdue step to restore peace in the Whittaker household. Others shook their heads, uneasy at the idea of family pushing out family. But beneath the surface of that decision lies a deeper story, one woven with years of struggle, painful choices, and the relentless tug of loyalty colliding with survival. To understand why the eviction happened, you have to go back. The Whittaker family has long carried burdens heavier than most. Health problems, financial challenges, and fractured relationships have all taken their toll. Through it all, there was a determination to keep going, to protect one another, to endure. But every family has a breaking point, and for the Whittakers, BJ became the spark that lit the powder keg. It started small. Requests for help, moments of tension, disagreements that could be shrugged off. Families argue that much is normal, but these weren't ordinary arguments. Each interaction seemed to chip away at the fragile trust holding everyone together. And then came the Coles' late-night pleas for money. Urgent and persistent, the $300 request became infamous within the household. It wasn't the money itself that stung. Everyone knew times were tough. That cash didn't come easy. What hurt was the reaction, the abrupt hang-up, the cold dismissal when help wasn't offered. To the family, it didn't feel like a daughter asking her father or relatives for support. It felt like a demand, like a test of loyalty wrapped in pressure. And then came the phone. In a part of West Virginia where cell service barely reaches, the landline was a lifeline. It was more than a phone. It was security. A way to call for help if hearts failed, if emergencies struck. Lorraine, nearing 80, carried the scars of multiple heart attacks. Betty, too, had faced her own medical emergencies. That phone was their thread to survival. So when it disappeared into BJ's camper, locked away, alarm bells rang. For the elders in the home, it wasn't just frustrating, it was terrifying. If chest pain struck in the middle of the night, if someone collapsed, there would be no way to reach help. Time was already not on their side. Without the phone, it felt like a death sentence. The act of locking away that phone changed everything. What might have been brushed aside as family drama now became a matter of life and death. Fear seeped into the house, turning every day into a quiet waiting game. What if something happened and no one could call for help? That kind of fear is corrosive. It eats away at trust, replacing it with suspicion, anger, and dread. But the phone was only part of the story. Larry, the family patriarch, found himself trapped in the middle as BJ's father. His love for her was undeniable. Parents don't stop loving their children no matter what. But love is complicated when mixed with fear. According to the whispers that circled the household, BJ had used that love as leverage. Allegedly, she had threatened to accuse her own father of terrible crimes if he didn't obey her demands. To the outside world, it might sound unbelievable, even shocking. But to the Whittaker grandchildren who had heard it themselves, the threat was all too real. Imagine being in Larry's shoes, a man judged not for his own actions but for the shadow cast by his daughter. On one hand, he wanted to protect her. On the other, he knew the weight of her threats. In today's world, accusations alone can destroy reputations, shatter lives, and leave scars that never fully heal. For Larry, the fear wasn't just about what BJ might do. It was about what others would believe if she did it. This left him in an impossible position. Do what she asked, even if it meant crossing lines he never wanted to cross, or risk facing consequences that could ruin him forever. In the end, survival instincts kicked in. He went along, even when it meant doing things like taking gas from someone else's property, something he admitted he didn't want to do. To him, the choice wasn't about right or wrong. It was about staying out of the crosshairs of his daughter's threats. And so the cycle continued. Fear leading to compliance. Compliance leading to resentment. Resentment leading to more division within the family. Each member felt the strain differently, but the conclusion was the same. This could not go on. That's when Patrick stepped in. Known for his tireless work ethic and determination, Patrick had already been fighting his own battles. His home was barely livable. No insulation, unfinished walls, the kind of place where winter cold seeps in until it feels like you're sitting outside. On top of that, his health was failing, leaving him unable to carry the physical burdens he once shouldered with ease. Yet, despite all of this, he made the Whittaker family's safety his mission. Patrick was the one coordinating the eviction. He worked late into the night, ensuring every detail was handled. He reached out for help, secured security, and tried to reassure the family that they weren't alone. But behind his determination was exhaustion. His body ached, his unfinished home weighed heavy on his mind. And still, he kept going. Because if he didn't, who would? This relentless effort didn't go unnoticed. Another voice, equally committed, stepped forward. They offered to drive 10 hours to odd West Virginia, to stand guard, to be another set of eyes watching over the property. It wasn't just about paperwork or security contracts. It was about showing up, proving that the family mattered enough for someone to sacrifice their own comfort and time to be there. Together, Patrick and this ally created a safety net. The community, too, began to take notice. Neighbors whispered about what was happening. Some offered quiet support, watching the property, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. Others shook their heads, unwilling to get involved but curious all the same. And online, the story spread quickly, each update drawing more attention, more questions, more opinions. To some, the Whittakers were heroes, standing up to manipulation and reclaiming their home. To others, it was a heartbreaking example of a family divided, where love had been replaced with court documents and security guards. But regardless of the opinion, everyone agreed on one thing. The situation was serious, and it demanded attention. Through it all, the Whittakers held firm. They knew there would be criticism, that not everyone would understand, but they also knew what was at stake. Safety, peace, the ability to live in their own home without fear. Those were things worth fighting for, even if it meant facing judgment from outsiders. By the time the eviction notice was officially served, the family was weary but resolute. They had endured too much, carried too many burdens, to turn back now. The paper was more than a legal document. It was a statement, a line in the sand, a declaration that they would no longer allow fear to dictate their lives. And yet, even as the ink dried, questions lingered. What would BJ do next? Would she leave quietly, or would there be more confrontation? Could the family ever truly heal from the scars left by these battles? Only time would tell. For now, the Whittakers are clinging to hope. Hope that the storm has passed. Hope that their home will once again be a place of safety. Hope that by making this painful choice, they've opened the door to a better future. But the story is far from over. Evictions, especially within families, are rarely clean or simple. Emotions run deep, wounds cut long. And as the Whittakers look to the days ahead, one thing is certain. Their journey is not finished. So tell us, if you were in the Whittakers' position, would you have made the same choice? Was eviction the only path left, or should family ties outweigh fear? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The conversation doesn't end here. It begins with you. The papers had been served. The words were official, stamped with the weight of the law. For the Whittakers, it was both a relief and a shock. Relief that the decision they had agonized over was finally in motion. Shock that it had come to this. That their story had reached a point where legal action had to replace family ties. For hours after the eviction notice was delivered, silence seemed to hang in the air around the Whittaker property. Everyone knew what it meant. Everyone knew that things could change in an instant. Would BJ accept it quietly, gathering her things and moving on? Or would she resist, turning the notice into the spark for something bigger, something messier? That uncertainty was perhaps the hardest part. The family had prepared for the worst. A security guard was already stationed at the home, ensuring that no sudden confrontations would spill out onto the porch or into the yard. The guard wasn't just there to keep BJ out. They were there to keep the peace, to reassure the family that whatever happened next, they would not be left defenseless. For Lorraine and Betty, who had spent nights on edge, it was the first time in days they were able to breathe without fear. But the sense of safety was fragile. Every sound, the crunch of gravel, the creak of the gate, the distant growl of an engine, made hearts jump. Was it BJ? Was she coming back, angry and defiant? The uncertainty gnawed at them. Fear doesn't vanish overnight, not when it has been built piece by piece, incident by incident, until it becomes part of the walls themselves. When BJ did return to the property after being served, the tension rose immediately. She didn't storm in with shouting or violence, but her presence alone was enough to tighten every chest and quicken every pulse. The guard stepped forward, a silent reminder that the boundaries had changed. She wasn't welcome inside. The papers had made that clear. Still, her emotions were visible. Anger flickered across her face, frustration at what she surely saw as betrayal. Family turning against family. To her it may have felt like an attack, like she had been cast out without a chance to defend herself. But to the others, it was survival. Two sides of the same story, colliding in the driveway, under the watch of strangers. There were no violent outbursts that day, but the chill was unmistakable. Words were exchanged, some pleading, some sharp, but in the end, the notice stood. BJ left again, but no one knew for how long. The papers gave her a deadline, but deadlines don't erase uncertainty. Would she comply, or would she linger, trying to test the edges of the family's resolve? Inside the house, the family wrestled with guilt. Evicting a stranger is one thing. Evicting your own blood is another. Lorraine sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, tears in her eyes. She loved her family, all of them, even BJ. But love couldn't erase the fear she had felt when the phone was locked away, when the threats loomed. Love couldn't make her heart any stronger or her body any less frail. She whispered that she just wanted peace, just wanted safety, just wanted the house to be quiet again. Betty echoed her words, though with more anger. To her, BJ's choices had crossed too many lines. Respect had been thrown out the window. Trust had been shattered, and when trust is gone, what else is left? The eviction, painful as it was, had become the only way forward. Larry remained the most conflicted of all. His face showed the weight of a father torn in two directions. He remembered the child he had raised, the daughter he had once held in his arms. But he also couldn't ignore the reality of who she had become. Someone whose choices brought danger to his doorstep, whose words carried threats he could never forget. For him, every day after the eviction notice was a balancing act between heartbreak and necessity. Patrick, meanwhile, pushed forward with determination. His body was still weak, his own home still in disrepair, but he refused to let that slow him down. He coordinated with the security guard, made calls, checked in with the family constantly. He reminded them that they weren't alone, that this was the path they had chosen, and that it was the right one. His exhaustion showed in the lines on his face, but his resolve never wavered. The community watched closely. Neighbors drove by more often, their cars slowing as they passed, eyes lingering on the house that had become the center of so much talk. Some stopped to check in, offering words of support or a nod of understanding. Others whispered among themselves, unsure whether to see the Whittakers as victims standing up for themselves, or as a family fractured beyond repair. Online, the story spread further. Every update drew comments. Some people applauded the Whittakers for protecting themselves, calling the eviction an act of courage. Others criticized the move, asking how a family could turn its back on one of their own. The debate grew louder, echoing the divide inside the house itself. Yet through it all, the Whittakers clung to one truth. They had to be safe. That truth carried them through the guilt, the criticism, and the long tense nights where sleep was scarce. They couldn't control what others thought. They couldn't rewrite the past. But they could take this stand and hope it was enough to protect their future. The days after the eviction notice stretched on like weeks. Each one brought new questions. Would BJ comply by the deadline? Would she come back with anger? Would the guard be enough if things turned violent? The family lived in a constant state of readiness, preparing for outcomes they prayed would never come. And yet, in small ways, peace began to return. Lorraine no longer jumped at every shadow. Betty began cooking again, filling the house with the smell of food instead of fear. Even Larry, though still conflicted, sat with his grandchildren in the evenings, telling stories that reminded them of better times. Slowly, the house began to feel like a home again, but the scars remained. No one could forget the threats, the fear, the moments when they wondered if their lives were in danger. Those memories lingered, haunting the edges of every conversation. The eviction notice had drawn a line, but healing would take far longer than any legal process. Patrick knew this better than anyone. He spoke often about rebuilding, about finding ways to strengthen the family, even as they carried their wounds. He reminded them that peace wasn't just about BJ leaving. It was about coming together, supporting one another, and refusing to let fear dictate their future again. Still, one question loomed over them all. What would BJ do next? Would she fade from their lives, leaving them to rebuild in peace? Or would she fight, turning the eviction into a battle that stretched on for months, maybe years? That uncertainty hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The Whittakers braced themselves for the next chapter. The eviction notice was a turning point, but it was not the end of their story. Whatever came next, they knew they would face it together, weary, scarred, but united. And now, we turn to you. If you were in BJ's position, how would you respond to being served an eviction notice by your own family? Would you walk away quietly, or would you fight to stay? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Because this story isn't just about one family in West Virginia. It's about the choices all families face when love and safety collide. The dust hasn't fully settled, but the Whittaker family's decision to serve an eviction notice to BJ has already carved deep marks into their story. It wasn't just a legal act, it was a breaking point, a moment where love collided head-on with fear, and survival won. But in the quiet that follows, the hardest part begins. Living with the decision, learning from it, and carrying its weight into the future. For the Whittakers, the eviction was never about winning or losing. It wasn't about pushing someone out to prove a point. It was about reclaiming something that had been slipping through their fingers for too long. Peace. Peace in the home. Peace of mind. Peace in knowing that their elders could rest without fear. That their children didn't have to whisper about threats in the dark. That their lives could be rebuilt without the constant shadow of intimidation. And yet, the emotional cost of that peace is undeniable. Evicting a stranger is cold business. Evicting family cuts deeper than anyone can measure. Lorraine, at 78, knows that better than anyone. She sits quietly in the evenings, her heart still fragile, her thoughts heavy. She admits she misses the days when her family felt whole. But she also admits something else. She feels safer now. For the first time in weeks, she can close her eyes at night without wondering if the phone is locked away, without fearing that the next day will bring another crisis. Betty, too, reflects on the change. Her anger has cooled, replaced by something more bittersweet. She no longer feels that constant knot in her chest, the dread of what might happen next, but she also knows that scars don't fade quickly. Trust, once broken, doesn't simply reappear because the thread is gone. Rebuilding will take time, and forgiveness, if it ever comes, will take even longer. Larry remains the most torn. He walks a fine line between relief and grief, between protecting his family and mourning the fracture with his daughter. Parents never dream of serving eviction papers to their children. It goes against every instinct, every ounce of love they've carried since the day that child was born. And yet, Larry knows the truth. He knows the choices BJ made, the pressure she put on him, the threats she allegedly spoke. He knows the toll it took on everyone around them. And so he lives in the contradiction, loving his daughter, but accepting that she cannot stay. Patrick has become the quiet hero of this story, though he'd never call himself that. His body aches, his unfinished home still waits, but he has given himself fully to this fight. He says it isn't about recognition or praise, it's about family, about stepping up when no one else can. But even he admits the weight is heavy. Evictions don't erase problems, they simply shift them, forcing everyone to reckon with what's left behind. The community has learned to. In West Virginia, stories spread quickly. Neighbors now see the Whittaker home differently, not as a place of quiet family life, but as a battleground where survival choices were made. Some whisper judgment, others offer support, but all are reminded of one truth: no family is immune to conflict. Behind every door, struggles exist that outsiders may never fully understand, and maybe that's the real lesson here. Families are complex. They carry history, love, resentment, and obligation all tangled together. Sometimes those bonds hold strong. Other times they fray until they snap. The Whittakers remind us that safety has to come first, that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that protect the people you love most. Eviction wasn't their first choice. It wasn't their second choice either. But in the end, it was their only choice. The question now is what comes next. Will BJ find another path, one that leads her away from conflict and into healing? Will the Whittakers manage to rebuild their sense of unity, or will the fracture remain permanent? No one can predict the future, but what they can do is hold fast to the reasons they made their choice. To remember that protecting their elders, their children, and their home was worth the pain of breaking ties. There's another lesson here too, one for anyone listening, anyone who has faced similar struggles. Boundaries matter. Love does not mean tolerating harm. Family does not mean accepting threats. It is possible to care deeply for someone and still recognize that they cannot be part of your daily life. It is possible to love from a distance, while still protecting those under your roof. The Whittakers didn't take this step lightly. They wrestled with guilt, fear, and heartbreak. They agonized over whether they were doing the right thing, but in the end, they acted. And their story, while painful, offers a mirror for others who may be facing their own difficult choices. As time passes, the Whittakers will continue to adjust. They will laugh again, though the laughter may carry an edge of sorrow. They will rebuild routines, though reminders of the past will linger in the corners. They will heal, slowly, imperfectly, but with determination, because that's what families do. They survived. And perhaps one day reconciliation might be possible. Perhaps BJ will find a way to face her struggles, to accept help, to rebuild trust. Perhaps the walls that feel so high today will crumble with time. But for now, the priority is clear: safety, peace, and the chance to breathe again. The eviction was the climax of their story, but the aftermath is the true test. Will they stay united? Will they guard the peace they've fought so hard to reclaim? Those answers are still being written. What is clear is this: the Whittakers chose to act. They chose safety over silence. They chose protection over fear. And in doing so, they sent a message to their family, to their community, and perhaps to anyone listening now. Love may be unconditional, but safety cannot be compromised. So we leave you with this question: what does family mean to you? Is it loyalty at all costs, even when safety is at stake? Or is it the courage to draw boundaries, even when your heart breaks in the process? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this story doesn't just belong to the Whittakers, it belongs to anyone who has faced the impossible choice between love and survival. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.